Well, hello everyone. Welcome to ThinkScript Studies on Thinkorswim. That's a lot of S's. But I am delighted to be with you. My name is Barbara Armstrong. I'm a coach with Schwab. And today I thought we would kind of take a step back and pretend that we are new to all of this ThinkScripts and creating customized ThinkScripts and walk through some things that we might want to create. And we're going to use some tools to help us do that. And so I hope you're game for that. I'm looking forward to our time together. I want to thank those of you who are here and contributing in the chat. I see a lot of the usual suspects, TM and Alexis and David and Lola and Scott and Vincent and Robert and Sharon. And of course, we have the fantastic Mr. James Boyd riding shotgun in the chat. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to fire them into the chat. And I'm sure between James and I, we can answer those questions for you. If you are not following us on X, please consider this your formal invitation. My handle, Barb Armstrong CS. James's handle is James Boyd CS, and Mike Fairborn, who typically teaches this class and has a well-deserved day off, his handle is Mike Fairborn CS. So feel free to follow the lot of us. We're posting content on a daily basis that we're hoping you'll find helpful. Know that options carry a high level of risk and aren't suitable for all investors. Everything that we talk about here in this class today is for information and education purposes only, not to be considered a recommendation. We'll be using the Paper Money software application on the Thinkorswim desktop, which is a great place to learn and a great place to play and figure these things out. So we are going to, just let me forward this. We're going to talk about what a goal might be if we're looking for a stock to either invest in or trade an option on. Let's say we're looking for a stock that is uptrending. And you're looking for a quick way to be able to go through and find what you're looking for. Because, you know, when you've asked Barb in the past in some of her other classes, she'll say she'll just bring up the NASDAQ and quickly click through. Is there not a better way to do that than clicking through 100 stocks on the NASDAQ and then another 100 on the S&P 100 list and then another 30 on the Dow? So you're looking for maybe something that's uptrending. And how do we define something that's uptrending? Well, we want it maybe to have crossed the 30-day moving average. You know, and we don't want it to be so far above. Like if we look at T-Mobile right now, I mean, it crossed the 30-day moving average, but I mean, it's so far behind, you can hardly see it in the rear view mirror. So maybe we want something that's crossed the 30-day moving average in the last 1 to 5 days. And might that give us some good guidance? You know, so, well, let's see. And you know, and the goal really is to find stocks that you might want to invest in or trade to generate income, or maybe trade an option to generate income. And, you know, can we create a ThinkScript to meet that goal? So let's get out to the platform and have a look. Okay, so I have a mere $9 million in this account, and none of it is invested. So although this doesn't look like a paper money account, it actually is. And so, you know, one of the things, and you know, I've often said this is what I will sometimes do, is I'll come to the NASDAQ and I'll link my chart to the watch list, and then I can just quickly start clicking through, right? If I organize these alphabetically, we can just start quickly clicking through, but you're going to get the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So far, there's quite a bit of good. Well, here's Datadog. And then we get the ones that, are doing not so hot. And if you want to trade bearishly, that's fine. But let's say we're looking for something that's bullish. So could we come and create a scan? And so let's just wipe the slate clean here, and we'll start with a new scan. And we're going to start with saying, okay, we'd like to see, let's say we want to see the stocks in the NASDAQ. So we still want to look at the stocks in the NASDAQ, but we'd like to only look at stocks that, are uptrending. And so we're going to come over here, and this is something that you have to do. Sorry, I'm on the wrong. To add a filter, a study filter, you can only add a study filter if you're in a live account. So this is a fake live account. And so it will automatically bring up the first one on the list, and you can change it. What we want to do is create our own. So we're going to come to this beside the D, this little pen, and we're going to get rid of this because we want to add our own conditions. It's not going to let me move this. So the condition that we want to add, we want the price on what we're looking at to have closed by crossing above a 30-day moving average. And so the study we want to look for is a simple moving average. And we could say, we can make it whatever we want. We could make it the 30, we could make it the 50. But if we just this will give you an idea, and then you can customize it however you like. So we're looking for a price that closes by crossing above the simple moving average for the last 30 days. Now the default is within the last trading day. But you might say, well, I'd be cool if it crossed within maybe the last 5 trading days. Then we have a better sense of, is this really breaking out or is it a fake out? Okay. So let's save that. And so we're looking for something that has crossed above the simple moving average within the last 5 days. And we're going to hit OK. And we're going to run that and see what we get. Well, we get 24 results. Now, if we start, we can save this as a watch list. And we could call this NASDAQ crossing 30-day moving average in the last 5 days. So that's what that means. And then when we come over to our watch list, it's now a personal watch list. And as we start clicking through, because I've linked, now I have a more specific list. This one has crossed the moving average. And in fact, this one's kind of interesting because it's also a diagonal resistance breakout. So you might look at that and say, well, that looks interesting. Then you come to Adobe, and this is kind of like a bit of a hot mess express. It makes me want to reach for my Tums, and we could look at that and say, well, it is above the 30, but it's below the 100. Maybe a better sign of something that's uptrending is something that's also the 30-day is above the 100. So maybe we could go and change our scan, because although it's appealing, with the scan the way it is, instead of going through 100 symbols, we've eliminated 75 of them. Maybe we want to come in here and say, we want to add another condition and say that we want this simple moving average, this 30-day moving average, to be above, so to be greater than or equal to the 100-day moving average. And so we're going to make this one 100. And we want that to be happening now. We want that index, that moving average, the 30-day to be above the 100. Now, might that eliminate some candidates that might be of interest? Hard to tell. So let's run this again. Well, now we went from 25 to 9. That's kind of interesting. So we could say this is our watch list now and call this our NASDAQ crossing 30-day above the 100. And, you know, you may want to throw the other watch list out. You can certainly do that. So if we then come in here and look at this one, we're going to come over to our charts. Now notice Apple's no longer in there. So even though Apple, so this is one of the things that we have to be aware of, right? Is that, you know, it's not the 30-day, it's kissing. It's Valentine's Day. You know, these guys are smooching almost, but it's just under by a smidge. So we wouldn't have seen this one had we just run this, only looked at stocks that were the 30 days above the 100. But we're going to see, chances are, much more bullish configurations if that's what we're looking for, isn't it? The other thing that we may want to include, because something could have crossed in the last 5 days and then crossed back under, is we could add something. So here's an example. This one crossed above and closed above the 30-day moving average. The 30-day moving average is above the 100, but it's not trading above the 30-day anymore. So we could come in and we could say, you know what? I want also, how would we say that? Okay. We want our 30, our price, the closing price, to be greater than or equal to the 30-day moving average as of today. So we're not going to make that over the last 5 days. We want it to still today be above that. So we're going to put in our simple moving average. Select. Oh, it's a study. Sorry. Simple moving average. And we're going to make that 30 days. And then this is, we're going to leave this at 1. So we want it to have not just crossed in the last 5 days, but we want it to have not been a fake out, or to still be above. So this one here, Cadence, which is no longer above, if we run this scan, it will likely no longer be there, will it? It shouldn't be if we've done this properly. So now Cadence isn't there. And now our list is really small. Like we're down to 6 stocks out of 100 that are part of the NASDAQ 100 that are trading, that have crossed the 30-day moving average in the last 5 days and are still above the 30-day moving average, where the 30-day is above the 100. And so it's a way of eliminating a lot of stocks. Now, could we use this? And we could come in here and say, well, the communication sector. So if I bring this up and we look at the S&P 500 sector indices, and this is S&P 500. So we're going to add here a description so we can see which sector's which. add that, and then I'm going to move it up here. Because I don't know what S&P 510 means. But now that I have this description, if I sort, by the last 3 months, we can see communications has been the strongest sector. So you might say, well, what if I looked at stocks that were in the S&P 500 that are also part of the communications sector? And so we can come down here to industry group and then come down to communication services. And then run this. And we have a whopping 2 stocks that meet that criteria. But you could also say, so let's look at the Para and WDBD. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because the 30-day is now above, but you wouldn't exactly call that stock uptrending, and we're just on the cusp of earnings. And then WBD. And here you might say, well, I'm kind of looking, keeping my eye open for a diagonal resistance breakout. Maybe we have it. But we might want to give it a day or two to see, if it follows through. It's just crossed back above that 30-day. But the 30-day moving average has not been acting as a support level for this stock, has it? But we want to see a break here. Now, what if you said, well, there are a lot of stocks that are not in the communication sector. What if we wanted to look at just all stocks in the communication sector? Well, we could come here and clear this filter and say, I just want to see all stocks in communications and run that scan. Dun, dun, dun. So we have got 41 results. But if we come and we look at our results, Arnett Technology is trading at 51 cents a share. American Picture House trading at 27 cents a share. China Tower Corp, $14 a share. So what if we came in and we said, you know what? We want to only look at at stocks that have a closing price with at least $20. Okay. And we might want, so let's see how many this eliminates. Well, most of them. We're now down to 10. But if we look at some of these, volume 6 shares in a whole day. This one 3. Your trading plan might say, well, I want it to have, at least 100, 250,000 shares. So we could come back in here and add another condition and say that we want, and it's a value. Or is it a value? Cancel. What I need to do is add another column here. I'm going to come, sorry. So we're going to add another filter for stocks and say that we want the volume on that stock. This is the easiest way to do it. Maybe your thing is, if I'm going to buy a stock, I want it to trade at least 250,000 shares a day. And that will weed out the ones that are trading 6 shares or 3 shares or 6,000 shares. Cogeco. Cogeco is a Canadian company. I happen to know because, all my family's still in Canada. Roblox. And Roblox, this is a gaming stock, and those that are gamers, a lot of people have opinions on this company. But when you look at this stock, it's gone from $30 a share last May up to 75, so up over 100%. And it came down on earnings, but seems to be recovering nicely. And so we could come and look at what's the news on this. So these guys adjusted their price target to 76, so they're raising their price target. Needham raised the price target to 72. Goldman Sachs to 63. Here's Moffett in their own little world, $34 price target. Bencham 71. So with the exception of this outlier, and these guys could all be wrong, but it seems that it's fairly bullish, right? And so if we wanted to place a trade, what kind of trade might we place? Well, we might say, you know what, I'd like to buy some shares of stock and trade it, do a swing trade back up to the previous high. And would that be fairly easy to do? Sure. We could come to the trade tab, 75, 74, where might we put a stop? We might say, hey, here's this recent low at 60.01. So 60.01 times 0.97, 58.20 would be our stop. And our target is 75, 74. Is it possible to screen for stocks by average daily volume in dollars? Geez, that's a great question. And I do not know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that one. So we're going to come in here and add this to our portfolio. We're going to buy custom with an OCO bracket. We're going to just buy 100 shares. And our target is to exit when it gets up to 75. Or if it comes down to 58.20. And we're going to make these both good till canceled. And our price, we're good to go. And then once we filled it, we could create. So I've sent that in. We now have a position in this portfolio, and we could create a group for this and say, let's call this group. You'll get a little box that comes up. We want to call this stocks with targets. So this could be an income generating strategy. And what's the most we can make is what we paid for it, less what the target is. So about $9 a share. You might say, well, that's not that much. Well, that's our goal. Beats a poke in the eye. Oh, sorry, I hit cancel. Beats a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, I would say. And if we could make if we paid 66.25, so we could make 875. If I bring up my calculator, oh, sorry, we've got to finish our group name. Stocks with target. So this is an income generating strategy. So now we have something in our group, stocks with targets. And we don't need days because this isn't an option, so we can customize this and say we don't want that. What we do want is net licks, the net liquidating value, so we know the current value of the position, so we can tell if it's getting too big for our account size. And we also want to see how well we're doing. What's our profit and loss percentage? So we'll add that as well. You can see, so it's a $6,000 position. We haven't really made any money on it yet. Big surprise. We've been in it for moments. So there's that example and kind of how to customize your monitor tab. Now, could we come back and do the same thing and say, okay, that ended up working out nicely for communications. Could we do the same thing when I come and look here, consumer discretionary, the number 2 spot? Might that be interesting? Well, so let's just come down, communication services to industry, and look at consumer discretionary. Now we already have this set up, and we're going to just select all consumer discretionary. Run our scan. And we've got quite a few. Now, we could create a watch list. We can also choose to save the scan. So we can come out here and say, let's save this scan, and we want to call it our crossover. Well, we want to call this one consumer discretionary. And you could just, call it uptrending or 30-day moving average crossover. You can name it whatever makes sense to you. And then when you come into your watch list, you're coming into personal. Here's our consumer discretionary. And it will run it. So if a week from now there are new stocks that should be included, then you're ready to go, as opposed to saving a watch list, which will then become static. So now we can look at these, and we know they trade 250,000 shares a day. We know they're all over $20. We know they're all trading above the 100 and above the 30. And that, so we're going to get more uptrending stocks, correct? Correct. And so, and these are all part of a strong sector. Well, isn't this interesting? So even in spite of all that, we might choose to trade Advanced Auto Parts, and we might go, yeah, that's interesting. It does meet the criteria, but it's still looking, more like an intermediate ski slope to me. Alta has a lot of runs like that where they go down and then you kind of coast up a bit and then go down again. And who's to say? I mean, I have no crystal ball on either Alta or Advanced Auto Parts, but there you have it. And so again, this meets our criteria, but it may not look like it's something interesting from our perspective. But this American Sports, well, what's this company about? Well, consumer discretionary, based in Helsinki. Okay. They sell sports equipment and apparel. There's not a lot of information here. So we might want to come and say, like, hey, how long have these guys been traded? Notice that this 30-day moving average only starts here. So if we come and customize this and create let's take this one and edit it, and we're going to make this a 2-year daily chart. Has this stock even been traded for 2 years? It hasn't. So first trading day was February 1st of 24. So it's been trading, for over a year. It's gone from a low of 10. It IPO'd here, at 13. It went down to 10. It's up to 34. We've got earnings coming. The last two earnings reports, it seemed to fare quite well. And so if you were looking for a consumer discretionary stock, and I don't know where Arc'teryx, Louisville Slugger, ATEC Brands. It's based in Finland, but I don't know. Oh, so they sell in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, the Americas. Well, so they're a global company. Let's come down and see, you could then come and say, well, what's their market cap? You can come and start looking at, other other things. So, 17 billion. So they're not small, but if we compare that to, say, an Apple, which is in the trillions, it's all relative, right? Here's our market cap, 3.6, trillion. So, and then we can do the same thing with the other sectors. So if you're saying, well, financials have been strong, let's see if there's anything interesting there. And instead of limiting ourselves to a particular index, we could just change this and say, okay, show me the financial sector. And, the financial sector, some might argue, if you're concerned about tariffs, this might be an interesting sector to look at because it's more tariff agnostic. We're not shipping things back and forth across borders. It's a service. These are service industries. So we could just change this to financials. Save it. Come over here to our financials. And then it's linked now to everything. So, we can quickly see if there are things that, look interesting. So Ameriprise Financial, ARCC, big bull flag, and then it pulled back, bouncing since. So it gives us lots of opportunities here. Axis, this is a 2-year chart. We might want to shrink that back down a little bit. Brookfield. And some of these are stocks that you may or may not normally look at. So by running this, you're going to get more likely bullish opportunities. You might say, like, well, I wouldn't be interested in that because I want to trade options. So I want stocks that trade 1 million shares a day or more. Well, we can go and pretty easily change, whatever we're doing, so that we can go and alter that quickly and just say, well, let's make the scan shares that trade 1 million shares a day or more. And I imagine that Discover would be one of them. Well, it's at 880,000 today. But, when we look, that's a pretty light trading day. Yesterday was 2 million. The day before that was 3. And so, this is another stock. It's gone from 108 to 205, came back and is bouncing again today. And it pays a dividend. So, we could come and look at this and then say, well, it has a PE ratio of $11. And that's something else we could add, that, that we want something that has a certain PE, or that maybe something that pays a dividend. But if we wanted to add that to our portfolio, and this is almost a $200 stock, so it's at 196, we could put in a target, or we could say, hey, as long as this continues uptrending, if it's generating a dividend, we'd like to stay. And we could hover over this candle and say, well, 183.83 was the lowest price recently. So let's put our stop at 178. And, we could put in a target, or we could just have this as a trend trading dividend stock. And so we could come in, buy our 100 shares, buy custom with a stop, put our stop at 178.31. Make that good till canceled. Confirm and send. And once that fills, we might want to put that in a different category, because we don't have a target on this one. This one pays a dividend. So we're going to move this and create a new group for this one. And we're going to call it stocks dividends. Stocks that pay a dividend. I can type, honestly. Not very well today, it would appear, but on a good day with the wind at my back. And this one we may want to customize too, because again, we don't have options as part of it. So we don't need that days category. We might want to put in, day remove. We might want to put in the dividend yield. That might be interesting to be able to see at a glance. And so we can customize these by group. And then we may still want that whole net lick, our net liquidating value. So we could add that. And then we could add our profit and loss percentage, so that we can easily see at a glance how much we're up or down. Okay, so, this one has a net liquidating value of almost 20,000, dividend yield of 1.6. Today it's up $6.50 a share. We're currently down 50 cents. So, but we're up $6 on Roblox. So there you go. You could go buy yourself a milkshake. Okay, so that's really what I had to share with you today. Excuse me. It's really basic stuff. But if you start with something simple and then go and click through your results, you might say, well, this isn't giving me quite what I wanted. Maybe if I add, another parameter, it will give me more of what I want. I don't want stocks that are trading under $1 a share. I don't want stocks that are trading 3 or 6 shares a day. And so that's a way of, an easy way of eliminating those is by putting in a minimum target and a minimum volume, and then, customizing as we go. So here's my ask as we wrap things up. If you'd hit the like button, it helps move this up in the algorithm so more people can find this content. If you would hit subscribe, which is in the bottom right of your screen, it will bring you to all the playlists and everything else. I also wanted to show you, and we can just bring up a new screen here. Just give me one sec. So if you want to see what the schedule looks like upcoming, you can just come to schwab.com/coaching and then click on live webcasts. And it will show you everything that is being taught. This is for the month of February. So if you say, how come Monday's blank? Well, it's because it's a holiday. But Tuesday, what's on the menu? Well, we've got trading futures at 8:30 with Ben Watson, if you hover over it. Then in the Investing Master Series with Mr. James Boyd, getting started with options, long options with Brent Moores, and then I'm teaching getting started with technical analysis and so on. There's content all day, every day. Now, if you really love a particular instructor, you could come in here and say, well, I want to see what and when is Mr. Boyd teaching? Well, he teaches every day of the week. So Mondays, trading with technical indicators, Investing Master Series on Tuesdays, trading growth and value is Wednesdays, trading the trend is Thursdays, and Friday he joins Kevin Horner for Trader Talks. And then when Ben is out of town, he will typically cover market movers. So, at least once a month and sometimes every other week. So that's it. So guys, thank you again for joining me. Appreciate having you here. Have a really awesome weekend. Was there a survey in the chat today? I think maybe there was. Just let me scroll up and have a quick look. Yeah. So there's a survey in the chat. I'm just about to repost it. And here's my ask. If you will take 20 seconds to fill it out. 1 means you hated it, 10 means you loved it, and then everything in between. And then I will pass all your comments on to Mike Fairborn, who typically teaches this. So if there are topics you'd like to see in upcoming classes, let me know, and I will pass that information along. So have a really awesome weekend, everyone. Make sure you get out there and hug someone you love. I will look forward to seeing you guys in a webcast coming up soon. Take care and bye for now.